It was a bright and crisp Sunday morning in the little town of Lily Pad Creek. The sun peeked over the rolling green hills, and the church bells rang in the distance, calling all the town folk to the morning service. But inside Gary the Gassy Grasshopper's cozy little burrow, there was deep contemplation and a whole lot of stomach grumbling. Gary sat at his wooden kitchen table, his brown cowboy hat tilted back on his head, tapping his boot against the floor. Across from him, Jim Bob the Frog adjusted his own cowboy hat, looking just as troubled. "Jim Bob," Gary said, rubbing his round belly. "I tell you what, that corned beef and cabbage last night sure was tasty, but my insides feel like a steam engine about to explode." Jim Bob nodded solemnly. "Yep, and don't forget all that root beer. I think I got enough carbonation in me to lift off like one of them space rockets." He patted his belly and let out a tiny burp, his eyes widening. Oof, that was just the tip of the iceberg. The two sat in silence for a moment as their stomachs rumbled like distant thunder. "Now, Gary," Jim Bob said, leaning forward, "we got a real dilemma here. Do we risk going to church, sitting in that quiet pew, knowing full well that at any moment one of us might let loose a tootin' catastrophe?" Gary sighed. "That's just it, Jim Bob. I mean, what if we're right in the middle of the sermon, and boom!" He threw up his arms dramatically. "Next thing you know, Sister Beatrice is fanning herself, and old man Jenkins is passed out cold from the fumes." Jim Bob shuddered at the thought. "We'd never live it down. They'd start calling us the Unholy Wind Brothers." The two of them chuckled nervously, but the fear was real. They loved going to church, seeing their friends, and hearing the pastor's sermons, but today was risky. "Well," Gary said, scratching his chin, "we could sit near the back and keep the windows cracked." Jim Bob shook his head. "Ain't enough ventilation in the world to handle what we got brewing, my friend." They both sighed. "We could stay home and pray right here," Jim Bob suggested. Gary thought about it, then shook his head. "Now, Jim Bob, that's just the guilt talking. We ain't the kind of critters to make excuses." Jim Bob nodded, then stood up, determination in his froggy eyes. "Then there's only one thing left to do." "What's that?" Gary asked. Jim Bob grinned. "We fast." Gary blinked. "Fast?" "Yep. We drink only water, chew on some peppermint leaves, and do some deep breathing exercises. That way, by the time we get to church, our bellies are as calm as a summer pond." Gary thought about it. It was risky, but it was their best shot. He stood up and straightened his hat. "All right, Jim Bob, let's do this." And so, after an hour of sitting in the cool morning air, drinking water and practicing slow, controlled breathing, burping and farting to get as much air out of them that was possible, they set off for church. As they walked up the church steps, Gary looked at Jim Bob. "You feeling okay?" Jim Bob nodded. So far, so good. They took their seats near the back and listened as the pastor began his sermon. Everything seemed fine, peaceful even. But then, both Gary and Jim Bob froze. The sound had come from Jim Bob's belly. Gary gulped. Jim Bob, that wasn't your shoe, was it? Jim Bob's face turned pale green. Nope. They exchanged a look of pure panic. It was going to be a long service,